2 and 2 doesn't make 4 anymore. At the moment, it adds up to exactly nothing. For the next few weeks, survival is going to have to be on an individual basis. At the moment, we have to have food, a way to protect it and a way to get more when it's gone.
What do you want to do? Write off the rest of the world?
When civilization gets civilized again, I'll rejoin.
Hello and welcome to every single sci-fi film ever. I'm Aisha Khan. Today we'll be talking about the 1962 film Panic in Year Zero, which was directed and stars Ray Milland. Before we get started, I did want to put out a trigger warning as we will be discussing rape and sexual assault as it's part of the film. The way I'll deal with this is I'll put out a beep when we're about to discuss the topic, and I'll also put in the show notes the length of time we discuss it for, so you can forward through if that's what you want to do. Today we will be doing things slightly differently. Instead of focusing wholly on the film, I wanted to have a little bit of a look as to why humans are so fascinated by Armageddon, apocalypse, end of the world kind of scenarios, and we have a psychiatrist to join us who will hopefully be able to help us unravel that. So moving on to my absolutely wonderful guests. Dr. Stephen Schlossman is a psychiatrist and an author. He's the writer of the book The Zombie Autopsies, which was being developed into a film by the George Romero before his death in 2017. Welcome to the show, Stephen. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Great. Joining Stephen is John Wills, who is a professor of American media and culture at the University of Kent. He's written a lot about popular culture, including 1950s American and nuclear film. Welcome back to the show, John. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Wonderful. I wanted to start because although this is a nuclear film, it's not actually the nuclear that we are dealing with. So, John, do you want to start explaining the non-nuclear nuclear film?
Maybe we're creating a new category here. For me, this film is. Firstly, I really love this film. I really enjoyed it a lot. It's great to watch, but it is not a film that's full of nukes. There's no explosions. There's no special effects. There's no sense of very little reference to radiation. You could be watching most of this film and think there's a different kind of backdrop going on. Or they could actually all be on vacation, rather than actually, this being a film about nuclear disaster.
Apart from the mushroom cloud, though, we do get one of those.
Yeah, we do, don't we? It's put in the belly, and we get it for about 1 second?
2-3 seconds, yeah.
2 seconds, something like that. So we do get to see a tiny bit of the, kind of nuclear disaster, and we do get some announcements on the radio.
This is the Emergency Broadcasting Network. All normal forms of communications appear to have broken down. Although there has been no official statement, the light flashes and the resulting cloud formations would indicate that Los Angeles and surrounding areas have been attacked by nuclear bombs or missiles. I repeat, this is not an official statement.
In a sense, the film is very much about a family and their, vacation turned survival quest. But we get to know very little about what's really happening. We can guess, can't we? We can say basically this is a Soviet-US exchange. And, we do know from the film that several cities, including Los Angeles, have been hit. But yeah, the focus of attention is not really around the nuclear for me on this one. Yeah,
absolutely. And what is the threat in that case?
Anybody who's watched this will know that the threat is even worse than the atom. It's ourselves. It's humans, aren't we? And in a sense, the threat is a return to barbarism and the kind of end of civilization. Well, at least for me, while watching the film, that was presented as the threat, and that in fact, a nuclear attack will lead Americans or all of us to kind of return to pre-civilization. The fabric of civilization will unweave in a really scary way.
Thank you. Steve, what do you think is like at the core of this? Like, we're talking about fear of the nuclear, but it's not really that we deal with at all. There's no kind of like fallout. There's no like people dying because of this, or nothing that we see on screen. Can you tell me your experience of it?
Sure. I thought the threat was jazz music. That was the hint in the movie. Every time there's jazz. No, I think it's still a nuclear film, but a different nuclear. It's about the nuclear family. I recognize that's a play on words, but the sanctity of the traditional nuclear family is what will save us not only from the destruction of nuclear war, but from all destruction. I mean, it's a weird movie. I thought I like watching it an awful lot because it brings me. I grew up in the 80s, but it's similar. The 80s were under Reagan, so the similar kind of emphasis on the traditional family roles, which I always thought was kind of silly. But at the same time, the message of this movie is very straightforward. If you stay in your lane, in your traditionally defined lane as husband, wife, son, daughter, you're going to be okay. And anybody who veers from this lane is in trouble. And so by extension, the risk is ourselves straying out of those. I'm not saying I agree with this, but this was the movie's theme. Straying out of those traditional roles. And that's the risk for any disaster, anything. Like, I mean, in the movie, really, the biggest disaster are, James Dean-like characters driving too fast. They do some pretty awful things in the movie. But you're right. I found myself thinking as I watched this movie, On the Beach wasn't too much before this. It's right there in your face. We're all doomed. Similarly, I was thinking of a movie when I was a kid, The Day After. Terrifying movie, made for TV movie. Those showed nuclear war. This doesn't at all, apart from a mushroom cloud and then them shielding their eyes. Like, don't look. Well, what do you think it is? Well, we better go find out.
Yeah, and that's what I find quite interesting and a little bit funny. But both of you experienced drills at school, which I found really fascinating because I didn't have that experience. I grew up in the 80s too, but I must have been too young. But both of you experienced like drills in your school of what to do if a nuclear bomb hit. Actually, Steve, let's start with you, and then we'll go to John about your experience of that.
Sure. So I grew up in the middle of the country, in the middle of the United States, in Kansas City. The same sirens that were used for tornadoes were also used for the occasional bomb drill. And we knew the difference between the people in this movie who the message seems to be that if you just paid attention to the civil defense advisories, you'll know how to survive this. The dad knows exactly what to get, where to get. Whereas when we did these drills, we all knew they were silly. We all knew that we didn't duck under the desk. We all knew that this was not going to save us. If a hydrogen bomb managed to land, or even an atomic bomb managed to land somewhere around us, ducking under the desk is not really going to help. So it was this, we almost made fun of it, and much the way kids do now, unfortunately, in the United States, of active shooter drills, these drills that nobody's really taking that seriously because they know that they're not going to really save them that much.
And John, what about the UK?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a similar time, so I was a teen in the 1980s, and it was very present, the nuclear threat, and also there was the sense of both support and criticism of the special relationship between the US and UK at that time. And at my local school, I lived in the middle of England at the time. At my school, we had drills too. So we had sirens going off, and would move to, if I remember rightly, there were some kind of half shelters. They weren't properly kind of, purpose built, but in the school, we had a few of those. And certainly there was a real sense of danger and kind of maybe a potential nuclear war on the horizon. We had in the UK also a movie called Threads, which was kind of an equivalent to The Day After that Steve just spoke about, whereby which depicted a very horrific attack on Sheffield, a city in the north of England. Some people don't like Sheffield and say, well, it's not too bad about getting rid of that city. But the film, wow, it's one of the most depressing and maybe realistic depictions of conflict and complete antithesis of a Panic in the Year Zero. That is graphic. This is kind of, suggestive at most.
And also, there was quite a lot of education in the US during the 50s, and there was the Federal Civil Defense Administration. And John, you were saying that they had pamphlets, and also I want you to talk about the film that I watched, which was called The House in the Middle. But can you talk a bit about both of those things?
Yeah, so in a sense, this film kind of references or picks up a range of stuff that the FCDA, Federal Civil Defense Administration, was doing in the 1950s. Although by the time of this film, it had already been disbanded and it changed form. But in the 50s, we had the classic kind of duck and cover, but the turtle kind of cartoon that's distributed across US schools. But there are a range of other things that were happening that we might link to this movie, or the movie even, you could say, picks up. I mean, one is that the film, the family are traveling by car and trailer. And in a sense, it's suggesting that we can survive nuclear attack by what they're doing. We're traveling with a car and trailer. Well, the FCDA had really explored that already in the 1950s as essentially a good idea. In fact, they'd taken a range of trailers to Nevada test site, the American Continental test site, and they deliberately did a nuclear explosion and checked which trailers survived best. And actually the Airstream, which is always, the one I would want anyway, the Airstream trailer, it had hardly any dents on it. This was not at ground zero, I should say. Otherwise there would be little left. But it was positioned a mile or two out, and there was very little obvious damage to that trailer. In fact, Airstream used that attack to kind of advertise the indestructibility of their brand, and other trailer manufacturers did. And there was also interest in cars as, to quote the pamphlet, 4 wheels to survival, that the American automobile would be your savior come nuclear attack. And that very much spoke to the idea of protecting and preserving white middle-class suburbia. Because in a sense, if a nuclear bomb's dropping on downtown LA, you've had it. But if you're a white middle-class person living some miles out in suburbia, and you've got your car, you've got a trailer, then in a sense you have got a little bit of a practical chance of survival, and you've got the means to survival through those tools. It's also interesting that the FCDA also, right at the beginning of their campaign in 51, 52, they were really preaching the rhetoric of panic as the real weapon. That in a sense, the bomb was a secondary weapon, but the one that really hit home would be Americans panicking. And I think that the film, although it's 10 years after this sort of stuff,
it does
is
feel
really picking up that message, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so I wanted to mention The House in the Middle because it's you've got to talk about it. The fact that it's about paint and tidiness and kind of corporate promotion of how these things are going to save you in a nuclear blast.
Yeah, and it's a really good message for us. I mean, I like to keep my house spick and span, probably because of this movie. So it was put out by the FCDA in the middle of the 50s. And again, it was stuff filmed at Nevada test site. And we have, I'm going to say house, but they weren't really houses, were they? They're kind of sheds. And there's 3 sheds put near ground zero. 2 of the sheds are a bit shabby. And then you've got the middle one, and this is very clean and tidy, and it's also been freshly painted. And you can guess which one survives out of the 3. It's the house in the middle. And the funny thing about this, not only the narration and the idea that if you've got a tidy house, you're somehow you're way ahead of your neighbours. You're superior in every way, including survival. But there's also the sense that the Paint and Lacquer Association basically, financed and had input into House in the Middle. And this is not a unique circumstance in the 1950s, because the FCDA is working on a very small congressional budget. they do turn to corporations, and the corporations are really helpful on all these topics, and they volunteer goods, they help produce documentaries, and in a sense they have input into the rhetoric and the message. And House in the Middle is a classic example, but you've got one to do with car insurance, you've got one to do even with sailboats, you've got, the trailers example, you've got all kinds of things, and they're showing a fusion between the corporate and the government world for the purposes of civil defence. But sometimes, to look back on them, they can be really hilarious. And I show this one to my students, and they actually really love it. And you can easily make the comment about their student dorms, about they need to tidy them up once they get home. So it's great fun for me.
It's going to wipe out any of us with ADHD because we cannot keep things tidy. But it's such a funny film.
We're doomed.
I think I'll leave a little link to that in the show notes because it's on YouTube and it is very funny. The other thing that's actually mentioned in this film, which is the CONELRAD, which is an emergency broadcasting system. So I just wanted to quickly mention another thing started by President Truman in 1951, and it was intended for use in the event of an enemy attack. So all of these things, like, we can learn about the Cold War, but it's amazing how much detail, like, these type of things go into your everyday existence, that if something terrible happens, this is what's going to happen. And they're going to have a continuing kind of broadcast information to the public, and they're going to have this really clever way of switching transmitters so that, the enemy can't zone in on any one particular space. So I thought that was quite good. Stephen, let's go to you and talk a bit more about jazz music, because this film starts and the jazz music starts and I'm like, okay, I can feel the 60s. I can feel this kind of free, wild, and you've already mentioned it, this free, wild spirit. But then it doesn't do that at all. And as you've said, it feels like such a 50s message and a 50s film. But just given a tiny bit of jazz music to kind of make it seem a little bit more 60s. And that's how it feels to me.
The jazz music in the beginning makes me think, and I see the trailer and I see the dad getting ready. I'm thinking, we have a road trip movie, which is kind of an American thing. Like I grew up loving road trip movies. I still love them. I suppose there's road trip films in, other wide open space. Australia, for example, there's a fair number of them. But then it becomes associated basically with real danger, with the idea that kids somehow, and this is not a new idea, listening to certain kinds of music or certain kinds of cultural influences become essentially sociopathic. They care about nothing but themselves and their own kind of base, visceral wants and needs, and they will take them by force. And it cracks me up because for a bunch of reasons. One is, again and again and again, we have shown that music by itself or art or anything like that is not associated with this kind of behavior. But also, the version of the really scary people in the movie are these hoods who just look like kids at a 7-Eleven. And like to me, it's that sort of dated nature of it. And I have to remind myself that at the time, this was really seen as and I've read a lot about this and written about this. This was seen as a real threat.
Yeah.
I find it interesting how throughout, especially mainstream media, and I primarily know media in the United States, things like their music, my music when I was a kid, are seen as really dangerous. Like, I think it was, the birth of the idea of the teenager brought with it all of these cultural influences. But then there was this corresponding pressure to not let these influences take our kids away from us. All you got to do is listen to this music, and the next thing you know, you're going to be murdering people, doing all sorts of horrible things. It's almost not the kid's fault. It's kind of on us to manage these cultural influences. It's so conservative to me. The funny thing for me is it never works, right? Like the more we try to control those influences, the less control we have over them. And so this movie misses that piece, right? They think like the dad is going to control these influences. He's just going to kill them. And that's what you have to do because they've already been tainted by almost the contagion of this.
Yeah, it's like the unruly music is going to make them unruly rather than...
Yeah, there's contagions everywhere in this movie. And one of them are these cultural contagions that they're trying to resist.
Although this father has like what I think are 2 teenage children, they're just so utterly well behaved. And it's such there's the male gaze or the patriarchal gaze, but it feels like such a kind of a daddy's gaze. Like it's just what a dad, like an old fashioned traditional dad would like really dream of just having these 2 children and this boy who's a teenager who just, he's his absolute hero and will listen to everything that the dad says.
Yeah. You figure we're done for, Dad? Like he's got that question. Or what was the other question? Oh, I want you to use this gun, but I want you to hate it.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about that gun scene actually, because it's very interesting and it sets up the dynamic of everything, because this dad is he's never wrong, right? Harry is the dad he knows exactly what's going to happen. He knows exactly what needs to be done. And anyone, like everything else is either I told you so. It's just constantly validated through the whole thing that this patriarchal figure will always be right.
I could have blown that guy's head off.
Wait a minute. You liked it, didn't you?
Well, you said that...
Then you're as wrong as they are. This is no deer hunt. I want you to use that gun if you have to, but I want you to hate it. A big piece of civilization is gone, and your mother wants to save what's left. And so do I. Don't you forget it.
As a father myself, I have 2 daughters. They're 25 and 20. This movie made me very anxious. I would not be able to do what this dad did. I wouldn't know exactly what supplies to buy at the hardware store or exactly what groceries to buy. I wouldn't know what firearms. I've never really held a firearm. I wouldn't know what firearms to purchase. But I think the message here is that this is the job of the man, of the father. Well, it also looked very lonely. He's lonely a lot in this movie. He's sitting by himself outside. And it occurred to me that one of the messages to me really growing up was this is the fate of a man. It's to go to work, to be alone, to come home. Like it wasn't real, but that was
always be right.
And to always be right. The one time he tries to say he was wrong, I killed those boys in cold blood. His wife says, well, I wanted to, I just am not as good a shot.
Yeah. But it's interesting because Anne, the wife, she says at one point,
after all these years, I thought I knew you, but you turn out to be a stranger. Robbing and mauling people like some kind of a cheap hoodlum.
We are fighting for our lives, Anne. The main highways are completely choked. They're spreading out on all the other roads. Every footpath will be crawling with men saying no matter what, I'm going to live. And that's what I'm saying, too. My family must survive.
Intelligent people don't just turn their backs on the rest of the world.
Under these conditions, intelligent people will be the first to try.
Getting your son to hold a gun on a man.
Drop it, Anne!
We're on our own, Ma. No rules, no regulations, and no laws.
Don't write off the law. The law will come back. I just want us to be around when it does.
John, should we talk a bit about all of this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I totally agree with what Steve's been saying. And the film is like a dad's guide to survivalism for other dads a little bit. And the kind of romance of, your kids being so obedient. That point you said there about how we're briefly opting out of civilization's rules. It weirdly reminded me of The Purge and that series of movies whereby you have a deliberate period of time where everybody can go barbaric and start killing each other. We have that innate need for violence. And then when the siren goes off, we return to, the rules of civilization. In a way, this movie has had that element for kind of playing out, or that came in at the back of my mind. I think that the film's kind of dad gaze is so strong, isn't it? You do get a sense, like Steve was saying, that it's actually quite a painful gaze at times. As you said, he's alone. you can see the stress, the responsibility, the grumpiness of him. But yeah, I really like Frankie Avalon in this, who plays Rick, the young son. You know, he's brilliant. I mean, he's like doting on his dad, isn't he? At times, he's smiling, looking up to him with the cameras capturing him, looking up to his dad so much. And how he's learning to be a survivalist. He's learning to be a hunter. He's learning to be a good American, isn't he? Through his dad in this movie. And occasionally he'll get it wrong, but the dad will, just as in that quote, will correct him, put him back on the right course. But at the same time, Frankie Avalon's so kind of charismatic. We kind of go along with that a little bit, just because we feel he's not a pawn, because he's so likable. You're almost, he doesn't need to answer back, because we look at him and he's all smiling, and we're won over too. But yeah, it's an interesting movie for that singular gaze, and the women are almost like a lost cause, or they're very much obedient. And then
they're useless in this. When civilization falls, women become useless. Apparently,
that's not true. They set the table in the cave. They're very good at that.
It is shocking, isn't it? And I think on some levels, it's playing the theme that we've already said about a return to kind of ideas of the traditional family of the 50s. But even like looking at Federal Civil Defense Administration stuff, they were trying to bring in women into roles of protection and roles of preparation. Whereas in this film, it's the dad. So it's a very it's an ultra traditional push going on here with Ray Milland's movie, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's interesting because all those things that, they are going on holiday, they intend to camp, they're taking their trailer, they intend to fish and hunt. And there is a romanticism of all of those things. And then you can think about all of the back to nature programs that happened in the early kind of 20th century in the USA. But there's such a romanticism around this that it partially, until it gets to the kind of serious stuff towards the end, it does feel a bit like they're playing a game, like it's a little adventure they're going on. Like you said, like The Purge, like let civilization break down for a bit and we'll have some fun protecting our women. And it's a strange mix. What's the kind of psychological thing behind that kind of survivalist outlook, Steve?
In many ways, it's sort of delightful. Like once the story that you're being told removes, which it often does in the beginning of these films. I mean, all the way through. Looking at I know George Romero's movies pretty well, and if you look at Dawn of the Dead, there is that time where they're adults, but they're in the mall and they're consumers. So they have everything they could ever possibly want. So for about half a year, it's delightful. You get to do what you want. You can take what you want. The rules are pretty straightforward. So life isn't complicated. This is all fantasy. I don't really I think life would be terribly complicated and kind of awful. But in the stories, and I've heard kids say this in my clinical practice, since I'm a child psychiatrist, how lovely it would be to not do your homework ever, to not have to make your bed, to not even really have a bed to make, to hunt for your food every day as if it's that easy, to catch your fish, to take what you need from the grocery stores, which are closed, and then we'll have square dances at night and we'll play music. And almost all of the movies that play with this idea show that in the beginning. And then they're almost kind of like a finger waggy thing where they say, oh, but wait a minute, it's actually kind of awful. And here's why. And often what's awful isn't the threat. It's as John was saying, it's not the nuclear war. It's ourselves. It's the way we descend and we lose rules, because if everybody's doing exactly what they want, someone's going to get hurt by definition. That's the opposite of civility.
John, you were saying that what drew you to this theme of Armageddon? You were suggesting that as a teenager it was very appealing to you.
Oh gosh, this is going to dig a hole if I'm not careful, especially after what Steve was just saying now, isn't it?
Well, I'll dig my own hole straight after. Don't worry.
I think in a way there is this sense of escapism and kind of romance and kind of fantasy, isn't there? That the films often touch on. And for me, growing up, in the 1980s, you had this one sense of what seemed to be a real threat of nuclear war, but equally, I think I was drawn to the science fiction kind of element of that, the sense of just being alone. And in all the movies, you get this sense of where you can go and you can get your own car for free. You often seem to meet, some sort of attractive person, even though you're meant to be the only person in the world. There's somebody else who's perfect for you. And you get this sense of kind of like, the beauty of the wilderness. I mean, films kind of, often play with this. I remember watching, let's say, for example, like Logan's Run from the 70s when I was growing up. And Logan's Run, they escape kind of civilization, and they Logan, who's kind of escaping his own kind of world, he ends up, for a time in this like post-nuclear kind of wilderness. And, everything seems kind of liberating, actually, that actually he can find himself there. And there is something about that for us. And I think that also maybe touches on, as Steve was saying, this kind of older romance of the wilderness and the outdoors and the hunter simplicity, kind of the sense that we don't have the stresses and strains of the modern world. Instead, we can somehow find ourselves. But it often has a bit of a kind of masculine lens. A lot of the films do, and also I did as well as a teenager. So I think there's those things going on, maybe.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, there is a romance to it, and you assume that, like, there won't be the mundanity and the banality of life, and you won't have your boss harassing you, and you won't have to deal with that nasty colleague down in accounts or whatever. Like, it's just all those kind of annoying things you assume will go away, but there's still going to be people there. But yeah, when you're alone on the road, and it's funny that you mentioned Logan's Run, because I always think that Jessica Six was probably a very formative character for a lot of men of a particular age who probably have this same kind of thing of like, yeah, no, I'll go on a kind of an adventure with her. But I think there is, and I found it interesting because Stephen, you'd said that this is a kind of fantasy that kind of peaks for around kind of, was it early teens?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a generalization because people are, around in development, they hit different ideas at different stages. And it's also a fantasy that is contributed to by our normal developmental stages, but also driven by the media that we digest. So, but yes, it's an early adolescent stage. You're just starting to play with the ideas of recursive thinking. I know that he knows that she knows. So being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. But you also, because at this age, you have to, at least the way Western culture is set up, that's around the age you're preparing to leave the home.
Independent,
you have to be comfortable that you can manage. And so these movies are often younger people, often young adults, but the Frank Avalon, I don't know how old he is in this movie for real, but he's supposed to be about 17 in the movie. He can manage. He can handle this. He's an amazing shot with the gun for a guy who doesn't hold a gun that much. He can tug that gargantuan buck that he shoots all the way back to the campsite. Like, this is a guy who will be okay, especially under his father's tutelage.
We see with Rick as well, I thought it's so funny in the scene whereby he attempts to kind of romance the incoming fellow teenager or young adult by basically saying to her, his first line is something like, "Would you like to look at my rabbit traps or come see my rabbit traps?" Such a statement of masculinity there.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Can we talk about that for a second?
Yes, please do.
So two thoughts. One is when he said that line, I actually had to stop the film and go back and hear it again. It's developmentally somewhat delayed. I can't imagine that being the come on line of a 17-year-old boy now. But if circumstances were such that the rabbit trap really mattered, it would be the thing. It would be what a boy might try. Now, most of the girls I know would roll their eyes at that, but it would be the thing that would matter. The romance
in an Armageddon, it's a status symbol. Look, I can trap rabbits. Yeah,
I can catch me a rabbit. Yeah, no, but otherwise, this is what's so interesting to me about the movie. It's a fairly, as a child psychiatrist who's interested in human development, it's a fairly developmentally regressed place. It's a very any attempt to think of the world in other than these very binary way. If there's going to be, in fact, the Army says this, right? When they send them off, they say, "Oh, there's one of the good ones," as if there are bad ones too. There's good ones and bad ones, and that's a very pre-adolescent stage. That rules to a game. It's teenagers start playing with rules to a game, but when kids are kids and they're learning those rules are sacrosanct. You're not going to break them, and I think. So that's the first thought. The second thought is the relationship that the Frankie Avalon character has with the girl that they find who's essentially been trapped there and horribly abused. We're supposed to think that all she needs is a nice boy, and everything will be fine for her. It's this very simple view of human nature that we can, there won't be months and months and years of trauma treatment. Like, this is terrible what she's been through. That's an interesting message to me too, and so overly simplistic as to be a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, this film was distributed by AIP, which is American International Pictures, and they did have the teenage 19-year-old boy as their target audience. So I wonder if it was even made with that in mind, that this is the type of stuff that they're going to like. It is kind of a formulaic kind of film in that regard, but yeah, it is strange.
Considering its focus on characters, we don't get a really deep sense of a lot of them. With the three hoodlums, in a way, we know it purely by their pose and that they're wearing leather, but we don't know anything more about them other than that they're wearing those clothes, so they must be bad.
And they probably like jazz.
Yeah, that's right. And we know what they listen to. Yeah. So you've got no real depth there. And also there was another line that I found really amusing that Steve might have found funny as well, is the bit whereby the Ray Milland, the lead character, he talks to the family about how to prepare for this difficult stage of wilderness and how civilization is going to briefly pause. And I love his line whereby he says that we have to keep to certain kind of traditions and rituals. And one of those he lists is that he's going to shave every day. But in the case of Rick, he shaves every other day.
Every other day.
Yeah.
He's a kid.
and Rick isn't angry about that. He has a little smile. He's like, thanks, Dad. I'll catch up with you someday.
Yeah. It's interesting because Anne's character and she's written that way, but she's so, first of all, she's quite annoying because that's how she's written. But secondly, every single concern that she has is utterly made insignificant because she's constantly proven to be wrong. And that's why it also feels like it is this daddy gaze film, like some middle-aged man who has a woman who sometimes says the right thing and he's like, no, I want to write a script in which the woman is never right. So it feels. But the only part where I think he kind of comes across is when she says, I need hope. And he can understand that. And it's almost like, it's interesting to think that civilization breaks down and then men get to be men. And then men pretending to be civilized when civilization comes back. It's an interesting kind of what's the barrier between civilization and not?
I think the message of these movies is that barrier is thin. It's not nearly as robust as we'd like to think that it is. And the further message of this particular movie, so here I'm not talking about movies like Night of the Living Dead or Dawn of the Dead, where civilization breaks down, or even more recently, 28 years later. The message is that you need this very traditional, I know I sound like a broken record, but a very traditional nuclear family to both survive the breakdown of civilization and also to bring us back through civilization. That the man by himself, as you're alluding to, couldn't do this, and the woman by herself couldn't do this, but together they hold the key to keeping us whole.
Interesting. And I now want to talk about the sexual assault and rape of the daughter. It's actually quite a light-hearted, or kind of as you said, quite a black and white kind of film. And then it has this very serious element where the daughter has gone off and then gets attacked by the hoodlums. So it goes to a very dark place very suddenly, and it's almost yet again part of that daddy's gaze, because he's warned her and he's warned his wife. And I'm surprised it actually went there.
Yeah, I think that it is quite it catches the viewer out. It caught me out. I think it doesn't help that we have I like the soundtrack, but that jazzy kind of upbeat musical score is not ideal for depicting things of such like gravitas. I think also the way it's acted is a little bit, I don't know, it's hard to read a little bit, isn't it? When they're grabbing her, there's a kind of odd, you're trying to work out what exactly is going on, and will the film actually go there? And it goes there by going off screen, and us not seeing it, and then you in a way, an effective way, you gradually learn about it by kind of meaning or tone later on in the movie.
Yeah, and what she says,
yeah, so that's quite useful in a way. But the point you were making about, I mean, in a sense, it's, there's a sense whereby she's just at the waterside, and in a sense, it's almost like, the father, is absent, so he's not actively protecting her. It keeps to all the traditional messages, doesn't it? And it also allows the dad to enact revenge. He doesn't seem to need much excuse to beat people up or be violent throughout the whole film. As you said, Steve, there's this thin line, isn't there, between civilization and savagery in this. I mean, he meets, a person selling him goods, and he's ready to kind of beat him up. So, but there's a sense of, well, this actually is a real justice killing when he comes face to face with the hoodlums. But in a way, it's also, for me, a shame, because the women are so absent. They're so disempowered, and this is showing yet again a kind of disempowered situation, isn't it? And that's another kind of putting this film in a 50s lens, a nuclear family lens, rather than in a 60s lens or a challenging lens, maybe.
There is at least a hint that it's the daughter's fault. That had she been watching her laundry, the blouse wouldn't have gone upstream, and they wouldn't have seen it, and therefore knew that she was there. It's a really hard. I was not expecting it. It wasn't consistent with where I thought the tone of the movie was. And the movie continues in that dark way when they go and they find the other woman who's been, basically, they killed her family and they've kept her there as a kind of prisoner for their own use. It, again, is this, women are to be protected. They have almost no ability to protect themselves. And this is the role of the man, of the father, and of the men, generally.
Yeah. And it's also, what happens in films a lot is that, female trauma ends up being used for male stories. So we don't really learn much about the daughter. We don't know, she's not really a three-dimensional character. That the only thing we really know about her is she didn't particularly listen to her dad, and then she got into trouble. There's no three-dimensional character there, but it informs the role of the father and the son and what they do and how it affects them, which again is a very old-fashioned and traditional way of writing, I suppose.
Yes.
I wanted to move on to the concept of, so we're in 1962, and this film, to me, I don't know why, and Stephen, I'm sure we can have a long discussion about this, but it feels like it's on the cusp of the zombie film, because in this, when you are killing the other, or you're killing these hoodlums, you need some kind of morality play. Whereas I think when you get into the zombie territory, you've got similar circumstances, but then you can get rid of that kind of morality issue. In this film, you need reasons to kill people to make the so if those hoodlums are causing problems, that's when you shoot them. Whereas with the zombie film, it's the same kind of end of the year apocalypse kind of feeling, but it feels very cuspy. You've got in 1964, you've got the Last Man on Earth, starring Vincent Price, which is kind of one of the, apart from the 1932 White Zombie, it's like the new phase of zombie films that are coming up. And then Night of the Living Dead will be towards the end of this decade. So can we talk about how this is a precursor in a way to the zombie revival?
Absolutely. It was awfully hard for me to watch this movie and to not be thinking more of Night of the Living Dead, which is essentially a home invasion movie, or at least you could see it that way, but of the zombie trope generally. And also, it was a sad thing for me to watch because when George and I were working so closely together, it was just fun for me to call him up and say, have you seen this movie? And then we would talk forever about these films. I'm sure, I don't know if he saw this film, but I'm sure he would love this film for all the things we're talking about. What happens in zombie movies? Zombies, I'm a physician, so zombies, it strikes me, are sick. They have some, pick your thing, a virus, a fungus, a radiation. But once we decide that they can't be cured, we, with impunity, shoot them. In fact, we shoot them in the head. That's the only place you can shoot them. But it's awfully hard to not see this movie and not see it as a direct path to Night of the Living Dead. But in terms of the aesthetic, among other things, the aesthetic, the black and white, the difference, of course, is that, there's a person of color in Night of the Living Dead. I don't think there's anybody of color in this film. And if anything, Night of the Living Dead turns on its head. It's almost as if once the monster becomes actually truly inhuman as opposed to a human form of a monster, then the inhuman, well, not so inhuman, but the nuclear family can then sort of come apart a little bit, because you might actually need to not have that nuclear family if the thing you're fighting isn't human anymore. I have to work on that thesis, but that's what I kept thinking about as I was watching it. I'm curious what John has to say about that.
The movie has these thugs, doesn't it? And we're meant to think of them as mindless, and we're meant to see them as a waste of time, really. And so in that way, and we know nothing about them as well. So they fit that. I also think, like with Steve, that the sense of kind of attack on the family, attack on the home, those sort of themes comes up. When we have these road movies that go wrong, it also reminded me of the Hills Have Eyes, whereby you have this sense of a family vacation, and lots of films do this. It's a trope, really, isn't it? But the family vacation that goes to hell because of these, could be zombies, cannibals, groups of thugs, whatever they are, who have no morals or kind of intellect, and they home in on these families as a survival issue. Those things came to mind. I love the Vincent Price one. I'd forgotten about it actually until you mentioned it. It's a great film.
I usually love anything with Vincent Price in it, though. So yeah.
yeah, he's adorable, and it has more of a kind of power to it than this film, Ray Milland's film. We return to safety always, don't we? Ultimately, and at the end we have the return to safety with the army kind of saving the day and being a good, loyal army, unquestioned.
Although just scaring everyone absolutely for no reason to death, like machine gun shots,
Machine gun shots, and then it's revealed that they're the heroes as well, isn't it? It's like it's almost like it's that thing of you need a little bit of a shock at the end, don't you, of the movie? But yeah, I think it's interesting, that this is right at the beginning of that process.
Okay, interesting. Okay, can we talk, aside from the zombie elements, the legacy of the film? John, this time.
Gosh, well, when I told a few people that I was going to talk about this movie, and they all said, "What? Who's that?" And I'm not even sure they know who Ray Milland is. And he's great.
Oh, well, I'm having you back on to talk about him later. So yeah.
Yeah. He's so grumpy. I mean, well, I do love how grumpy he is in this movie. So I think in terms of some of the other films that you cover, this one, is a bit of, a kind of non-entity in a way, isn't it? And it's a shame because, we talked last about On the Beach, and everybody knows On the Beach. Everybody also, knows Neville Shute's novel, and that has some legacy to it.
But to be fair,
does this have enough? I don't know. You tell me.
Like, to be fair, I do think they are a different caliber of film. You can't really compare On the Beach to Panic in Year Zero.
Are you saying Gregory Peck And like they're not in the, sorry.
I know I don't have a quality filter. My son watches Jason Statham movies regularly, so I'm not sure whether I'm your best judge on this program for any sense of leading role for movies. But I think that it's. I mean, also it's a mega low budget, and it was done in a rush, and it shows. It's nonetheless, an
it's
interesting
pacey, it's good
film.
fun, it's interesting, yeah.
It's a fun, how far we can call it fun, but it's an interesting movie, and I think that it's very valuable in terms of capturing a lot of this conversation about survivalism, civil defense, how to survive nuclear war, what do we do as a family. It still kind of touches on those issues of, hey, if I have a shelter, if I have protection, or I can protect my home, what do I do with my neighbors? Or, what do I do with other people who are actually lovely people, but I'm going to shut them out? There's lots of kind of, it actually surprisingly, it picks up on a lot of themes to do with bigger ideas. But, as a film, it has its limits, but I still found it great fun.
Yeah, it's. I shouldn't enjoy the bit where he punches that guy for trying to overcharge him for petrol, but I'm like, yeah, petrol is too expensive.
Yeah, he's a bit like Michael Douglas in Falling Down. He's kind of taking justice, isn't he? Whereas Ray Milland, he's kind of, the thing is he's taking it to capitalism, but then he's also kind of ruled by it too, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Stephen, legacy of the film.
So trying to put myself, like John, having grown up fairly, if you had asked me whether we would find ourselves in a nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union when I graduated from high school in 1984, I would have said yes. Like I thought that it was a near sure thing to happen. There was a kind of, what is the point? Like I went off to university, I did all these things, but what's the point? What was neat for me about this film, I know I've been kind of bashing it a little bit, but it brought hope. It said that we can get through this if we pay attention to how best to survive. I mean, it's essentially an impossible task to survive, but if we have the fantasy that we can get through. My parents were married during the Cuban Missile Crisis, like during that year before. They talk about it like literally not knowing if the sun would come up the next day. Like, and trying to get my mind around that, this movie would have been helpful there. Like the sun will come up. Kind of in a return. It's almost like a Western in a lot of ways. It feels like a Western. So the American Western idea that we will be in the frontier and we'll take care of ourselves. It had a weird kind of optimism as long as you don't think about it too hard.
Yeah. And maybe if you painted the trailer in the car, you'd be extra safe.
Right.
That's right, yeah. And you're male. You need to be male as well, don't you? That's one of the issues.
Right. And a good shot.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I would like for both of you to suggest something for the listeners to pair with this film. Stephen, this time.
Oh, I feel a little guilty about my first thought, which was The Day After. That movie, it came out, I believe, in 1983. It was a made-for-TV movie, but had some real star power. It had Jason Robard. I hadn't watched that movie again since I was in high school. We watched it at my high school because it was the town I grew up in that received the nukes. So we were actually watching our place where we would play basketball.
Oh, interesting.
Have people kind of wandering around in rubble with their hair falling out from the radiation. I felt I needed to see a movie after seeing this movie about the horrors of nuclear war. I needed to remind myself that it is not going to be like this. I don't get to live in a cave and go fishing. Like, it's going to be awful. And there's really, with the hydrogen bomb, no place that's not available.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. John, recommendation?
For me, I think I was going to suggest a book called Every Home a Fortress, Cold War Fatherhood and the Family Fallout Shelter by Tom Bishop. And it came out about a couple of years ago. It's an academic book. But it explores some of the things we've been talking about briefly today. Tom looks at ideas around the father, the male figure in kind of this 1950s, 1960s period. And so, yeah, that's an appropriate kind of academic side to kind of Ray Milland's fantasy movie in a sense. So yeah, that's mine.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to both of you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Great. That's it for this episode. Next episode, I'm going to be slightly jumping ahead and then jumping back in time again. Next episode, we'll be talking about The Day of the Triffids, which is 1963, and then we're going to have to come back to 1962 to talk about The Manchurian Candidate, which I have decided is science fiction because we can't all agree on a definition, and therefore it's going to be discussed. And if you would like to support the show, please do. If you could leave a lovely rating or review in your favourite podcasting app, it's really, really appreciated. Like, subscribe, share with as many people as you can. And if you wanted to financially support the podcast, you can do that by going to my Patreon channel, which is patreon.com/every sci-fi film. And there, for £3 or $3 a month, you can support the podcast and get ad-free versions of the episodes. Thank you so much for all your support and for listening. And I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.